Hi, my name is Winsley, and today we're going to be doing a beginner's guide for high evasion builds in Age of Wonders Planetfall. I'm joined by Ninjew. You want to say hi, Ninjew?
Hello, my name is Ninjew.
Yeah, we've done a couple of these videos with some guests. I think you've been in one of them, is that correct?
Yeah, I was in the trencher one.
The Trencher one. Yeah, that was awesome. I really enjoyed having you around. I think we went a little bit over my normal time, which is great because that means that we had a lot to say on the topic. And I think that's a really useful video for newer people. If you haven't checked it out, I'd recommend you go back and check that out as soon as possible. Um, Excited to talk about evasion here because this is one of those mechanics that is very powerful and easy to overlook. If you don't put a lot into it, you can miss a lot of really cool things. In this video, we'll basically start with some general tips, a combat example, then we'll work in some tips about the playable races and some of the secret tech stuff. Probably won't spend too long talking about that. And then the last thing we'll talk about are some of the mods. So, my first general tip I put was that it doesn't work against melee, which is a pretty important consideration. I can start this combat just to show it off really quickly.
Yeah, melee's a big deal. Also, its other kind of natural counter is area of effect attacks. Most area of effect attacks, if you're not aiming directly at the unit, but instead aiming on like the ground next to them, it'll still hit them and kind of bypass the evasion that way. Boy, these are some jittery Amazons. What's going on?
I might have the animation speed turned up.
No, I always have the animation speed turned up. Mine never looks like that. How do you get it to look like that? I want that.
Hacks. Maybe it was lag or something. I don't know. That's weird. But yeah, you turn that off, no less jittery, right?
Uh, they're now slowly jittery.
Oh, I see. So yeah, if I tried to range attack this guy, you can see that he's getting all the evasive bonuses from his mods and then a little bit from cover. If I went into here and tried to melee attack him, then there's no reduction to the hit chance. And that's pretty important. Yeah, this guy's got mods.
An important thing to remember when we're talking about like accuracy and evasion and attacking people is if you go back to that Lancer and show the attack again, 25%. It's not actually a 25% chance to hit. It's a 25% chance to score like a direct hit, and then you have an additional 25% chance on top of that to get a graze, which is half damage. And no, it like I don't know if it reduces stagger by one level or if it eliminates stagger. I always ask that question, and
Yeah.
I never remember the answer to it. But that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind, that when you're kind of making pot shots, if it says 25% chance to hit, you actually have a 15% chance of, or a 50% chance of dealing damage, which like the graze damage is pretty poor. But if the unit only has like 3 HP left or something, it's important to remember that pot shots can actually still have a decent chance of doing some good damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another point on the cover thing. Sinsling mentioned to me right before the video that the cover reduction is done after it looks at evasion, and then it basically reduces your hit chance by 50%. So it's 25% reduction from the cover because before that it was 50. And I know I should have known that, but that's something that I missed about cover entirely. I thought it was kind of like a number that you got like in XCOM or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cover's kind of weird like that. It's always it can be a little difficult to predict exactly how much cover is helping you. Besides, it's usually really helpful, and that's why it always hurts to play against like Amazons who ignore cover on in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, but the evasion still applies. You can't use bypass cover to get through evasion, so that's kind of nice. It can keep you guys a little safe that way. Just to elaborate a little bit more on what me and Sinsling were talking about, he was saying basically if you've got a unit that is 40% evasion and has a reduction to hit by 20% from the cover, it's probably a good idea to try and get around to get a better angle or better shot of engagement. Whereas if it's only like reducing things by 50%, 10% from evasion and 40% from cover, that's less important. I think that's partially because of things like grazes. Do you agree with that statement? It might be better to like move around to try and get a flanking shot or something like that, I think was his point that he was trying to make. I was a little bit confused by it, but I think it is worth mentioning.
I mean, I would think it would work the other way. If all of your accuracy is being taken off by the cover, then that's where you'd be looking at finding a way to eliminate the cover. While if the cover is only giving like a 14% evasion decrease, then like if you ran up and threw a grenade, or if you got into a sick flank shot or whatever, like that's still a unit that's going to be really difficult to hit without the cover.
Yeah, maybe I misunderstood. He was saying it the way you're describing it, and I was thinking of it as like, this is my unit, when he was thinking like, no, that's actually the enemy unit. So
Sinsling says some weird shit sometimes. He probably, I bet if we asked him, he'd have a pretty good explanation for it. But I don't always agree with him on things, and sometimes he says some stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But he's also basically the best player I know, so I don't want to discount whatever he said.
Yeah, I think my main takeaway from from our conversation was cover is slightly less useful for high evasion units, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't like pay any attention to it. There's also line of sight, yes. And cover can be kind of a pain with line of sight. So I could see why that would be something that you wouldn't necessarily want to put your dudes all around. I also know cover can be destroyed. You could use like an AoE to destroy all the cover. You can't destroy evasion bonuses. The only way to get around it is melee, from what I understand.
There's melee, there's area of effect, and there's of course boosting your own accuracy.
Mm-hmm. An important consideration is if this guy misses his shot against this unit, he could hit an adjacent one. So high evasion units don't want to be surrounded by other units. I think that's easy to miss when you're starting out.
Having one or two units next to him is okay, but like it is always important to keep in mind. That's generally something that I tend to think of more when I'm using melee units, is if I'm going to like attack a dude in melee and then shoot him, it's usually better to do it the other way around, as a like just in case of miss, this way I don't shoot my own guy.
Yeah, because that hurts a lot.
I usually wouldn't consider that when I'm just like shooting at enemies' units, like, oh, are his units bunched together? Maybe my missed shots will hit one of them, unless I'm firing like an AoE. Mm-hmm. Area of effect attacks, when they miss, since they have a wider area of effect, it's a lot more likely that they'll hit adjacent units. And also some of them have a guaranteed scatter of like 1, like I think the Barrager does that.
Yeah.
So whatever center hex you're firing at is always guaranteed to be hit with the Barrager.
It's pretty nice. I think I've had a couple situations where like it fumbles and it does something weird and doesn't hit the one in the center, but it's pretty powerful. I love that Barrager unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why always make sure to look at that Barrager's repeating attack. Always remember that it has that 40% attack chance. Again, that still means that the unit that you're attacking directly is going to be hit by every attack, but it is going to, the AoE is going to be spread around a lot. That means barrages are really good at having like status effects attached to them because they hit such a wide area.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't a video about the barrage.
It is a little tangent. It's worth mentioning, I think. One other thing that we were talking about before we started the video was how flying units have they start with 10% evasion just by being flying units, except for against other flying units attacks. I think if I had this guy try and shoot them, there's no reduction to hit chance, but if I have him try and throw a spear up here, it is 10% less likely to go through just because the unit is flying and the attacking unit is not.
Yeah, flying units are kind of their own whole topic here. They're probably the most notable use of evasion, just because you have, again, 3 counters to high evasion builds. You have melee, you have area of effect, and you have accuracy boosts. And of those 3, area of effect and melee are really, really hard to hit flying units with. There's not a whole lot of melee units in the game that are able to hit flying. There are a couple. There's flying melee units like the Amazon Lightbringer and like Unleashed, and probably a couple others. And there's very, very few ground melee units that can hit air units. I know the Phoenix Walker can, and the Herald of Oblivion can, and I'm not sure that there's any others in the game that can do that. I'm guessing there's probably one more, but
I didn't know about the Phoenix Walker. His like primary attack can actually hit
Yeah.
flying units. Wow.
yeah, his melee attack can actually hit flying units. Though I think they don't melee Overwatch on flying. I'm not certain of the interaction there. I almost never see those 2 units in play. So
Yeah.
pretty much all I know about the topic is they have melee and they can hit flying units with it because they're very, very tall.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Makes sense.
so again, as we were kind of talking about earlier, sort of the biggest counter to high evasion is melee, and flying units mostly don't have to worry about that. So if you stack evasion on a flying unit, there's a very high likelihood that you're not going to encounter any melee that can hit you. So you can stack your evasion really, really high with no direct counter. Area of effect attacks also, while they have the same kind of behavior against flying units, it's a lot harder to hit a flying unit with an area of effect, because if you aim it directly at the unit, it still has like a 35% hit chance, and most area of effect attacks are going to scatter multiple hexes away rather than the barrage's 1 hex away. And you can't aim at empty air hexes unless you are using a controller. For whatever reason, like Xbox controllers and that control scheme is able to target empty air hexes.
Huh. I had no idea.
Sinsling has played entire battles against me using his controller specifically to exploit that.
That's amazing. I feel like that needs to be a thread or something online. That's great.
Yeah, but anyways, since you can't normally attack the ground next to air units, empty hex next to air units with area of effect, it's a lot harder to use area of effect attacks to bypass evasion as well. So that's, with some exceptions, of the 3 counters to evasion, flying units aren't going to deal with 2 of them.
Trying to show off that you can't. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I think Xbox controller, or the controller control scheme has like a select air layer button or something like that. So you can use that to attack empty hexes on the air layer. And the AI is actually capable of doing this too. The AI will do it to you, although you cannot do it back to the AI.
Of course. Seems fair and balanced.
Yeah. Anyways, so because the other big thing with flying units is that they tend to, like, all flying units already have that 10% evasion. There's also a number of flying units that have, like, additional evasion attached. Like the Shrike, for example, has the evasive defense mode and its swoop attack, which ends it in evasive defense mode. So it ends up having 60% evasion for a turn, which is really, really annoying.
Yeah.
I think the Harrier on its AoE, it might have to end in defense mode or something too. I'm not certain. I don't think it does. I don't really use Harriers very much.
This is a hero Harrier, so I don't think it does. Yeah, it doesn't. But I can probably.
I know the Wild Harrier also has the swoop. Check the laser bombardment.
On
Amazon Harrier. I think that might have an end in defense mode. I'm not certain. I don't really remember. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
I understand. I think it actually doesn't.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. Okay. There's a few other flying units that have like other things. For example, the gunship and the assembly lightning rider have evasive maneuvers, which is like another word for skitter, basically. It's technically not skitter. You can actually have skitter and evasive maneuvers on the same unit, which is really hard to do, but really funny when you get it.
I had no idea. Would that be like an assembly hero and a Lightbringer? Um,
That would
assembly,
be like a
Xenoplague or
Xenoplague
something?
hero, like
Yeah.
a Xenoplague hero in a gunship or a lightning rider, or the Shakarn mod that gives skitter. You could put that on a unit that has evasive maneuvers. And then there's also actually a Shakarn hero who comes with evasive maneuvers, so you can put the skitter mod on him and get both. And then that's a ground unit with both, which is really silly.
Yeah, that's a lot of
But
evasion.
to kind of talk about skitter a little bit, skitter's sort of weird in that it you get a lot of evasion out of it. Like as an example for how much evasion you're usually getting, um, one of the highest evasion granting mods in the game is Guardian Daemon Shell. That gives 20% evasion. Most evasion boosts are more in the realm of like 10 to 15%. There's you can actually see here with these Amazon units. I think I had you mod the Shrike right before this fight. There's that Primal Awareness mod, gives 10% evasion. Oh, we talked about the Shrike, but yeah, the Hunters have it. Primal Awareness Amplifier gives 10% evasion. Flying gives 10%. The Vanguard Sensor mod gives 15%. Skitter, if you move 5 hexes, the maximum number of hexes that normal movement unit is able to move, that gives you 25% evasion. So a little bit more than Guardian Daemon Shell does. And then if you red move, or sprint, is I think the technical term for it, if you sprint, you get additional evasion for each of those hexes too. It actually, if you use like siphoner resets on very fast units, there is a cap. Skitter caps at 40% additional evasion. You don't gain any past that. But that's still a hell of a lot. And again, 25% evasion is really, really good. But it requires that you expend all of your movement points to get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very few of the units that get Skitter also get a 1 AP attack, or at least a 1 AP attack that's not on a cooldown of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
So while Skitter looks really nice on paper, in practice, Skitter tends to be in play for like 1 or 2 turns while you're kind of like making the approach before the units have actually fought. And then once your units are actually attacking each other, you kind of have to choose between getting additional evasion or dealing damage. And in most cases, dealing damage is going to be the best option there. Though, of course, there's like all kinds of little optimizations you can make. I always find having Skitter makes fights way more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because in particular, it's such a powerful like approach tool. And we kind of talked about this in the Trencher game, or in the Trencher video, but in case anyone maybe isn't familiar with the concept of an alpha strike or kind of like burst damage, basically the first 1 or 2 turns that units are exchanging fire in are going to be the 2 turns that are most important to how the battle's going to come out. That doesn't mean that if you're behind after those first couple of turns that you're not going to be able to make it back. Amazon in particular are pretty notable for they'll lose a couple of units in the engagement turn and then just absolutely wreck shop after that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can get additional value on those engagement turns specifically, that's more valuable to have on those turns than on any other turns. And Skitter gives you a lot of value in kind of positioning. It lets you move into much more aggressive spots and get much better set up without really having to worry as much about like getting punished for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
This is really notable on Shakarn, who really like to play really up close and personal, and they also get that Skitter mod. You can, on the turn before the engagement turn, use sprinting to put all of your units into like the perfect spots, and it's really, really hard for your opponent to hit back at you. Like Raiders can, if they do their full move plus their full sprints, it's their fast unit, they get that full 40% evasion. So I had a really funny game where I think I did like evasion defense on Raiders against Sinsling, and he was trying to hit me with like his laser tank, and his laser tank only had like a 40% shot against a Raider that was standing 1 hex away from him.
That's pretty
Uh,
amazing.
and like that sounds really broken, but like then again you have to remember like my next turn either I don't get that again or my unit isn't allowed to attack that turn. Um, so that's kind of the trade-off with Skitter. Is Skitter tends to be much more valuable for like 1 or 2 turns, and then your unit kind of has to fend for itself, mostly without Skitter. You'll usually be able to walk between 1 and 3 hexes to get like 5 to 15% additional evasion. But at that point, it's not really mattering as much. But if you can get into a good position for that engagement turn and utilize that to do a lot more damage than you otherwise would have on the engagement turn, it's so extremely worth it.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. Um, I like that they added Skitter to destroyers. It used to be just the pustules with the Xenoplague, but having destroyers get that means that they're capable of closing the distance. I think just having a lot of evasion in general is good for melee, so they can get up close and start wrecking without taking too much damage on the approach. But pustules also have small target, which is super nice. The combination of those two things together. There aren't too many
it
with
ends up
small target.
Yeah, it ends up meaning that they get a lot of evasion. Small target's not a common tag. It's like, oh, it's actually 10% now. 10% evasion. So you throw that on top of Skitter, and so again, pustules they have fast movement. So if they do the full sprint, they get 40% from evasion. Plus they get 10% from small target. So that's 50% evasion just for like moving and positioning yourself. Pustules also have like a little leap attack, which I think it does about as much damage. It might do like slightly more damage than a regular melee strike.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does 1 point more damage. Is that on a cooldown? It's not. Yeah, so the leap's nice because it means that the pustule gets to move its full movement and then still have this like 1 AP attack it can do. Like the difference between infectious bite and ambush leap in terms of damage is such that it's not really once the engagement turn has happened, you're gonna want your pustules to be doing like actual melee attacks with their standard attack just so that you can actually get damage in.
Yeah.
But it is nice that they always have that option, and it lets them be really mobile, and of course they can maximize their Skitter value, get that 20. I think it's actually 30% for them because they have fast movement. Get that 30% evasion plus 10%, so they have 40% evasion, and then leap on someone. It's pretty nice for them. And destroyers actually destroyers have gotten buffed a number of times. At game release, they were considered worse than pustules. Actually, like people didn't want their units to evolve because pustules were the best T1 around, and destroyers were basically like a slightly below average T2. But yeah, Skitter on destroyers really helps them a lot, and I think they've gotten like HP buffs or something too. I don't remember the full patch note history for that.
Yeah, there's definitely a problem when they're fully modded and you're facing them to like clear out stacks or something like that. But I agree. I think that they weren't amazing, and they've only gotten a little bit better since release.
They're pretty good right now. The Skitter on them helps them a lot. I think they've gotten some HP buffs again. They got that ranged attack. They didn't always used to have that. That helps them a ton too.
Yeah.
It means Xenoplague doesn't get hard countered by flying anymore, just kind of soft countered.
Yeah.
The armor melt on that's real nice. Destroyers right now are a pretty strong unit. At least when a pustule upgrades into a destroyer, it's not disappointing. It's actually your army strength has improved considerably by getting that upgrade, rather it being a lateral or arguably worse move.
Yeah. All right. I think we can talk a little bit about prime rank evasion now, and then bouncers before moving on to the other stuff.
I don't know if I have a whole lot to say about prime rank evasion, other than it's a source of evasion. That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
There's a few units that get it. I don't have a full list. Um, I know we had talked about this earlier. Several Amazon units get it. The Shrike, the Huntress, and I think the Lancer.
Yeah, yeah. This
Yeah.
this dude down here also gets it.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's one of the better prime ranks you can get. I think. There's definitely, I wouldn't consider it top tier, but I'd probably consider it above average. I'd rather have prime rank evasive than prime rank critical, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly no prime rank range or prime rank firm, but
Yeah.
it's nice.
We should do that next week. We should talk about the prime ranks. I think that'd be a fun discussion.
That's probably a discussion you should have with like Mr. No or Sinsling. I don't level up my units a ton.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I saw. I used Mr. No's little resource that he put together to actually find out which ones have prime rank evasion. Because if you go in here and you just search like Huntress, you can't see that when it gets to prime rank, it gets the evasion. You have to have like a unit in game to do that. Let me see if I can do that easily with. I would pull up the website easily.
I know the
Recording. Yeah.
database that Mr. No and Tibbles work on together has a lot of that info, and that's pretty nice. Though you actually, they don't make it immediately apparent. There's like a little XP icon that you have to mouse over.
Mm-hmm. It may have changed since you last saw it because I see it listed right here next to the unit name. It's like underneath where it has flanker and defense mode shields. It looks good. It looks nice. But
They have they list the prime ranks that each unit gets on like the like underneath all of their abilities and stuff. But if you want to see like how much HP they get per level up and how much accuracy and stuff, you have to mouse over the little thing.
Yeah, that's true. It's slightly different. It's not quite everything, is it? I see the XP thing that does that. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, the slight tangent for most units, it doesn't really matter. It tends to be normalized by just tier. Like tier 1 units get 4 HP, and then tier 2 units get like 6 HP.
Mm-hmm.
Some units, though, it does matter for. Off the top of my head, I know that it matters a lot for Drained.
Yeah.
The Heriter Drained unit gets actually gets additional damage on level ups, I think. Though the database isn't showing, so I don't know if maybe I'm just.
No, it's there. We talked about it last week. That definitely is how it works. Yeah, every level gives you +2 base damage that you know.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any other units that are an exception for that there. Anyways, going back to Evasion. So do you think it's time to talk about the Bouncer? I'm kind of like, I don't know what else to really say about Evasion in general.
Yeah, I think actually it's a perfect time to jump into it. I was just going to say there's like a handful of other units that come with prime rank Evasion. The Devar Prospector comes with it. The Kirko Emergent does. The Syndicate Runner. The Vanguard Owl. The Misfortunes come with it. The Bouncers come with it. Actually, the Medusa comes with it, which is kind of interesting because they're a large target. It's kind of cool, but useful for that unit. So yeah, what did you want to say about Bouncers?
Bouncers are absolutely ridiculous, and I hate them. Pull up their card.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch it back to game and pull it up so you can see what I'm talking about.
I should have gotten a beer or something for specifically this moment so I could get like a little drunk before I start ranting about Bouncers.
Do what you must.
So first thing I want to point out with Bouncers is let's ignore like put your hand over the screen where it says defense mode evasion and primal pheromones prance. Like we're not even going to look at those right now. Just take a look at like their stats. They have a 12 damage repeating shot, 45 HP, 3 armor. They have regular movement, but they also have this leap and bound ability, which is not on a cooldown, which lets them move an additional 4 or 5 hexes. I know it's range 5. I forget if that comes out to actually 5 hexes moved or if it's 4 hexes moved. But they have that. They have bullet spin, which lets them end in defense mode. Like this is a very good unit. Ignore defense motivation, ignore primal pheromones prance. This is a perfectly powerful unit. 45 HP and 3 armor. For comparison, Lightbringers have 50 HP and 3 armor. Lancers have 50 HP, 1 armor, 2 shields. Like these are very, very close to melee unit defensive stats. It's like 5 HP away.
Yeah, compared to this guy, which I think is in the same slot, it's got way more defense.
Yeah,
better
and way
attacks.
more damage too. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy. Like look, that guy has like a melee attack that does less damage than the bouncer's ranged attack.
Pretty insane.
Okay, so now go back to the bouncer and let's talk about the things that I said to ignore. So
Hmm.
first off, defense mode evasion. That is 50% additional evasion, and they get that immediately after using bullet spin because bullet spin has an defense mode. So that's 50% evasion right off the bat. Then let's take a look at Prance. Prance is absurd. Prance gives the unit, when it activates, it gives it 15% evasion and skitter. And that skitter is applied retroactively. So if you have your bouncer move 5 hexes, then use its jump, then use bullet spin, and then it gets brought down to its 66% HP, which is pretty high. 2/3 of a unit's HP is still quite a bit.
Yeah.
It gains not only 15% evasion, but it also gets skitter as if it had skitter when it made those movements. So if you move 5 hexes, you get that 25% from skitter, plus that 15% from evasion from just prance on top of that, which puts you at 40% evasion. Plus, no, it puts you at 40% evasion. Plus, you throw that defense mode evasion on top of that because you use bullet spin. You're sitting at a clean 90% evasion, no mods attached on a unit that, again, if you took this, like, this is already a fairly tanky unit before you consider 90% evasion. And, like, you might be thinking, like, oh, well, I can get around the evasion and attack it with melee units. Yes, technically, you don't have to deal with the evasion. You're just dealing with 45 HP and 3 armor, which is, like, for a tier 2 unit, some of the best defenses against melee you're going to get out of the box.
Hmm.
So, and that's before we start talking about throwing on Guardian Daemon Shell and the Vanguard Sensor mod, or anything else like that.
Hmm.
Like, you can, if you want to evasion build, bouncers are absolutely ridiculous at it. Though, really, what you should be doing is throwing on just a bunch of like armor mods or something like that, because the evasion that they just start out with is so crazy. Like, if you jump in and bullet spin and someone attacks your bouncer, once Prance activates, they're not going to attack it again.
Hmm.
It's just not going to happen. So you have this 12 damage repeating unit standing in the middle of your enemy formation, and it just gets a free turn. Like, it's basically invulnerable. And even on the follow-up turn, like, 15% evasion, plus if it gets like an additional 5% from skitter, like 20% evasion is nothing to sneeze at. For like if you have a unit with 90% accuracy shooting at it from point blank range, it actually only has 70% chance to hit, not counting in anything else. That's a pretty big deal. And 12 damage repeating is a lot.
Hmm.
Especially on, I think it's like a 5 range attack, so it's not super long range, but like this is such a mobile unit that like it's gonna have something that it can do that too anyways. And there's like 12 damage repeating on a ranged attack is pretty rare. T2 repeaters in general are pretty rare, but on the ones that do exist, like the Hacker and the Electrocutioner each have like 11 damage. 12 damage is really high. That's like bordering on T3 repeating damage. And again, this is all before mods.
I think that range and the way they maneuver makes them a really nice pairing with any army, but Amazon in particular, because the Huntresses, they engage at 5 range, and they do repeating attacks. They can boost evasion. It synergizes really well. I know, like you were saying, that there are diminishing returns the higher you get your evasion, because the difference between 85% and 90 isn't gonna make a giant difference compared to like 0% to 5%. That jump is a far bigger deal, just due to like how statistics works. Like every once in a while you'll miss, and every once in a while you'll hit. It's not always like 100% accurate. Or
It's more like, realistically, if you are the guy with a gun and there's a bouncer standing next to you and you have a 20% chance of hitting him, you're not going to take that shot. You're going to find anything else you could shoot instead. And if it's instead 15% or is instead 25% chance to shoot the bouncer, you're still not going to take that shot.
Yeah.
You still just have a better move elsewhere.
Okay, cool. That was actually all my stuff for the general stuff. Is there anything you want to say before we move on?
I should probably mention at some point that Prance also applies to other units that are nearby it, other friendly units. Yeah. That doesn't actually come into effect with the bouncer specifically as often as you might think, just because they play so aggressively. They tend to not have a lot of friendly units nearby them.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a really powerful buff to give a friendly unit if one does happen to be nearby. It means that if you pair them up with like melee units or with like initiates or other close range units, you can get some additional value out of that.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, I just pretend that isn't there, and then if it activates and another one of my units gets the bonus, that's like a nice extra, you know? It's just so powerful on its own already, and bouncers kind of operate a little bit distanced from the rest of your army that I personally would not give myself a headache trying to figure out how to maximize like bonuses on that.
Yeah, I agree. I know there is a nice Therian mod that lets you trigger the pheromones when you want instead of when your health drops to a certain percentage, and that could be used to like get your guys that you want to move forward some extra evasion. But I actually have never used that in AI or in multiplayer. It just hasn't come up yet, so I don't know how useful that really is. It doesn't seem particularly useful. It's like really late game strategy. You'd have to unlock a lot of Therian stuff to get to it.
I mean, I think that's more useful if you're like also running the like Therian Alpha. I think they have a pretty good pheromones. Prance is actually really, really good for pheromones. It's better than most of the other pheromones that the Apex, not the Alpha. It's better than most of the pheromones that Therian units get, and it's kind of on like not their first unit, but you can get bouncers off of the first level of friendship with Therians.
Yeah.
And like it's definitely the best pheromones that you have access to for a while. I would argue that it's better than the chemist's pheromones too, though there's an actual argument to be had there.
I like the
it's
chemist.
definitely better. Yeah, it's definitely better than the sharpshooter's pheromones, and it's definitely better than the prowler's pheromones. So
I think, well, the nice thing about the chemist is they have all these other nice AoE things that are on a pretty short cooldown.
I'm kind of just talking about the pheromones. It's kind of nuts that this really early unit gets like the best, basically. And if you were going to use that like trigger pheromones mod, I would consider using that on the Apex, maybe the chemist. But if I was still using bouncers at that point in the game, which they're so good that I very well could, then yeah, the bouncer would be a pretty good target for them, just because that's such a powerful boost to give your units.
All right, so I think we can now start talking about just our thoughts about the playable races and the secret techs. What do you want to start with?
I mean, so there's not a ton on the topic other than like a few notable points. In terms of secret tech, like there's not really a whole lot to say on the topic with secret tech other than synthesis and void tech both give you a T1 evasion mod, and Xenoplague units have skitter, and we've kind of already discussed most of these things already. I don't think we need to go too much into detail on them. Just remember, if you want to do an evasion build, your big seller is going to be Guardian Daemon Shell. You go synthesis for that. If you are void tech for other reasons, Phase Walk mod, perfectly good source of evasion. You really use it more for Phase Walk, but 15% evasion, just 5% less than Guardian Daemon Shell. It's a pretty damn good trade.
Yeah. Agreed.
In terms of races, there's a bit more to get into. Amazon, we've kind of already been talking a lot about. They get that Primal Awareness Amplifier, which gives 10% harder to hit and cannot be flanked.
we could jump into that. I did want to mention that Wojtek does have phase manipulators, which is a flying unit. It's one of my favorite flying units in the game. It's just so good being able to evacuate people. But yeah, that has that evasion, and I think pairs well with melee builds. So if you're like trying to build evasive melee units that run forward, and then one of them gets damaged, you can pull it back with the phase manipulator. You know, plasmoids have small target with Promethean, and that was it.
They actually
You can
don't
go for
anymore.
it. They don't? Plasmoids don't? What?
They used to. That got removed.
That's painful.
They were too good of a unit before, buddy.
That backlash, right? Whoops. Yeah, I gotta take that on my notes.
Backlash and a 12 damage melee attack.
Mm-hmm.
This is a T1 unit that has T2 kind of offense, basically. So, yeah, they got nerfed.
Yeah, I should have noticed that earlier because I looked up Skitter and it didn't pop up, but I'm glad you're here.
Plasmoids are still really good units. Like, I think a lot of people tend to think of them as like this like dinky little, like you get it as like a scout or something, but they're actually really powerful units.
Oh yeah.
If you mod them up. At 35 HP, 2 armor, they're not going to be able to take too many hits at base. But if you throw some mods on them and like get them a couple levels, you get so much more value out of them. They're really scary, especially with Vanguard mods. I think some of the scariest builds I've ever been up against are Vanguard rushes, where they just load up a ton of mods onto plasmoids.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's also some really funny stuff you can do with backlash, like if you're, for example, I did this in a game a while ago. If you're fighting someone who, like, you're attacking their city and their city has turrets, turrets are always going to attack the enemy unit that is closest to them. So you can like sprint your plasmoids out into positions where you can guarantee that the turret is going to shoot the plasmoid. And then when it does that, it of course activates backlash. So you just like nestle your plasmoids in between their units and just like, you know, you sprinted to get there, or maybe you like smack them with lash out or whatever. But really what you're doing is you're eating those turret shots. So you can now move safely with the understanding that that turret's not going to attack your units, but also the turret is going to do more harm than good by attacking your plasmoid. Because if you get your plasmoid between 2 different units, backlash actually does quite a bit of damage.
Oh yeah. Especially if you can get like thermal weaknesses going out there. That's nice.
Yeah.
All right, we can now talk about the playable races. I think you started talking about, was it Amazon or?
Yeah, I started talking about Amazon. There's not a ton to say about Amazon other than they get that primal awareness amplifier. Shrikes are a pretty good chassis for an evasion defense or an evasion build. Not one I would necessarily recommend because they are a scout unit, but like you get a lot of extra value by just throwing on like Guardian Daemon Shell onto them and just calling it a day. Just because they already have that defense motivation, and of course the swoop gives them evasion. And they're flying units, so they get that extra 10% evasion. And these are actually pretty good. All the scout units are like surprisingly good in combat. Not as good as real T1 units, but they don't actually lag very far behind. They have some neat tricks they can pull. So if you're really like trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel for like, I really just need some bodies on the floor fast, just throwing out some Shrikes with Guardian Daemon Shell on them, you get a lot of extra value out of that.
Yeah, that bit where it says it's 20% harder to hit by ranged attacks, it should just say 20% harder to hit, like 20% evasion or something like that, right? Because that's how evasion works.
Yeah, there's actually some. I don't know where. I do know that there's still some places in the game where it actually just says 20% harder to hit instead of 20% harder to hit by ranged attacks. Melee still bypasses it. Once upon a time, there was a distinction. Melee didn't used to bypass evasion. So there used to be a distinction between mods that grant evasion and mods that grant evasion, but only against ranged attacks. But one of the early balance changes was melee bypasses evasion. So that's not really relevant anymore.
Okay, that makes sense. It's just residual. It's left over from a time before. The other thing I wanted to mention with Amazon is they can tame some animals that come with Skitter and small target, like the piglet, the swarmling, the thundermoth swarmling comes with, I think, small target, and those are great units. It's nice to have even more options to to boost your evasion to have that stuff all over the battlefield.
All right, so going down the race list, assembly doesn't have a whole lot to do with evasion other than they have cloaking implants. It's actually kind of a nice mod now. 15% harder to hit. It's kind of overpriced if you're not taking advantage of the universal camouflage. But like if you're taking advantage of universal camouflage a little bit, it's a pretty good mod. You get 2 armor, 15% harder to hit. That's pretty nice. But in general, I wouldn't say assembly's really the evasion race, except for if you're using lightning riders. Lightning riders get evasive maneuvers, so getting something like synthesis, guardian daemon shell on top of them is really, really nice value.
Yeah, I like the idea of a Xenoplague leader in a lightning rider. That seems like that would be really powerful and something that I want to actually like dedicate a playthrough to, just to see how good it is against AI. Because I have a feeling that, you know, a human player might be able to counter it, but the AI might just be like, it's too much. I don't know what to do.
It's actually pretty nice because as cyborgs, you can put the Xenoplague mods onto lightning riders. Like you can put the Xenoplague parasite on them. It's a really nice early mod. So yeah, you actually a lightning rider build in general I think works okay with the Xenoplague. I think in that case you're really using it more for the hero skills, but you do get some nice additional value out of the Xenoplague parasite, and potentially if you want to use any of those other mods too. Lightning riders in general are in kind of this weird place where I think people would generally consider them the worst of the flyers, which I would agree with only to the extent that I can't think of a particularly bad flyer. Lightning riders kind of have this issue where their really big selling point is you use the like charge ability that gives them 50% damage the next turn, and then you use their really big AoE attack. But that AoE attack can hit friendly units. So if you have a whole bunch of lightning riders, there's kind of like a friendly fire issue going on, or it's hard to take too much advantage of that alpha strike potential. Because if you're avoiding hitting friendly units, you're also like, it's a lot harder to then hit one particular enemy unit enough times to kill it. But honestly, they just have so much stuff. Like evasive maneuvers is really nice. Their AoE lets them end in defense mode. Arc charge it really helps with that kind of like, you know, again, the like alpha strike mentality of like, okay, in your setup turn you use arc charge, and then your next turn you have a really extra valuable attack on the turn where it's most valuable, the engagement turn. And honestly, like their AoE does so much damage if you manage to hit several enemy units with it, which isn't super difficult to do because it's a 2-hex radius. And you know, it's a 2-hex radius stagger, and it also, your lightning rider's fairly safe afterwards because they got 25% evasion out of evasive maneuvers, plus 25% from defense mode, so they're sitting pretty at 50, actually 60% evasion because they're flying too. They end up being fairly safe on the turn and following.
Yeah.
So
Siphoner could probably reset them too to get more out of their evasive maneuvers, right?
Siphoner resets, or also assembly heroes have this ability called Cybernetic Overdrive. That's also an AP reset. I usually don't consider it all that good, but with lightning riders, I would definitely say take it, just because you can use the arc charge to get that 50% more damage. And then, you know, you can then use arc charge twice. Like you get to double up on their arc charge turn by resetting them while they have that active. There's also, I think it's the, it's actually, okay, it's a assembly op. It's called Linear Accelerator. It's in the same tier as Cloaking Implants. That is also an AP reset. So lightning riders, you kind of have to, I would highly recommend playing the AP reset game with them because they have slightly more kind of accessibility to that than you normally would. Most people don't get an op that lets you do that, or a hero skill that lets you do that, and they in particular benefit from that. And if you combine those things, I think Lightning Riders do better than most people expect them to the point where I would say they do pretty good. I think they are a perfectly good flying unit.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they're pretty good. They're kind of nasty to face off against every once in a while. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't talked to other people about it, so I don't know what the overall consensus is. So I trust you. It sounds like people don't like it. You want to talk about Syndicate next? Or Kirko maybe?
Sure. I mean, okay. I'm just kind of going down the like. I've just been going down the alphabetical list,
Sure.
which would put Devar next.
Let's do Devar next.
I don't have a lot to say about Evasion with Devar, though. They don't have any particular boosts to Evasion, really. They get the trenches, which is pretty nice. That makes you can stack that with, like, again, Guardian Daemon Shell. Because of the way cover works, and like we were talking about that earlier, it's not as valuable, but it's still pretty valuable. Stacking those two things together, like, it is pretty nice. I would consider Guardian Daemon Shell a pretty high value mod on them, but yeah. I don't think there's anything notable enough about Devar to really recommend them for this kind of build, so much as if you happen to have the tools anyways, might as well put it together.
Yeah, I didn't put anything in my notes for Devar. So after Devar is
Kirko, which there actually is quite a bit to talk about, for a couple reasons. There's Engulfers are, of course, were for a very long time considered the best flying unit. I don't know if that's still true. I think it is, but they're kind of harder to get to now. The really big thing with Kirko is they get psionic mods, and an early one is Mantra of Clarity. That's 15% harder to hit. That's a pretty nice little chunk of evasion. Of course, it requires that you have a psi unit use the ability, but Kirko have a lot of ways of applying psi mods. They, of course, have infamously their big hero skill that if you get your hero high enough level, you get a like battlefield-wide psionic application. I think it's called Guiding Hand now or something.
I've been playing Kirko a bit recently.
They changed that because it was so broken, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, way back when. Yeah, it's okay. Still pretty good, but it's like, full action. Only a handful of units can be affected. But go ahead. What are you gonna say?
The really big thing is that Shrouded Step applies it, which is of course a hero skill, but it's also a hidden skill. And hidden already, so Shrouded Step, I think it already gives 40% harder to hit. So you throw the Mantra of Clarity, 15% harder to hit on top of that. That's a 65% accuracy reduction before you factor in anything else at all. If something's standing in that cloud, you're not going to shoot at it. If you have an AoE, you'll shoot at it, but for the most part, that's a lot of evasion to just kind of get,
I think one of the issues I've had with Hidden in the past, and one of the reasons I stopped using them a bunch, was when I would do that, the AI would run into my cloud, and then I'd have a little bit of trouble taking out the guys that got into that cloud. It's probably because I wasn't using the Shrouded Step properly. Obviously, you want to put that down in a place where the AI can't get too easily. And this is a sniper, it probably shouldn't be getting too close anyways.
Hidden kind of work really well in sort of like, they can play a sniper role, but they're really more of like a skirmisher role. They tend to just try to stay at a long distance from their enemy, but like not as far away as traditional snipers would. The big tool for that is Agile Overwatch. They can make their full movement and then still get a full powered sniper attack. It just plays by the rules of Overwatch instead of getting to target it yourself, which is pretty nice. A big thing, you do want to keep enemy units outside of your cloud. If an enemy unit steps inside of your cloud, that's pretty bad for you, just because the cloud's so powerful. But Kirko, ostensibly, they get Frenzied, which aren't a very good unit. So I'm just going to put out there, theoretically, you would have Frenzied standing around to kill units that are standing around outside of the cloud. More realistically, you'd have Unleashed, which are generally better at fulfilling that same role. Their melee attack is actually really nasty for the price that you're paying for Unleashed and for getting it on a flying unit instead of a ground unit.
Yeah. These guys get Frenzied, right? No?
I don't think they do.
Huh.
No.
Okay. Okay. I'm
But
remembering it wrong.
generally, with when you're playing around with hidden, you're kind of wanting to watch your spacing a lot more so that the enemy isn't going to be able to step inside of your cloud very easily. Um, you can also just like, if they're spending a turn getting inside of your cloud, then you can typically just like wait a turn and then take care of them the next turn when the cloud's gone.
Okay. Yeah, that cloud is says the cooldown's 3, but it doesn't really indicate how long it sticks around on the map, does it?
I think it sticks around for 2 turns. So you have the turn it comes up and then the turn after. So as long as you make sure they can't get into it on the turn it comes up, you're not that poor off.
Okay. Good to know. All right. Should we move on then?
Probably. Let me just double check something to make sure. I know if you get into late game Kiriko, they have evasion mods. They have like a cloaking carapace is a mod I don't think I've ever actually seen used, but it's probably a really good mod. They also have, I think it's
Oh yeah.
accelerated metabolism, gives them skitter late game.
I think
So that's all pretty nice.
cloaking carapace on an engulfer could be pretty nice.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can because it has to be a light unit, right?
Is that what it said? Did I miss that?
Yeah, non-ethereal light units.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very, very good. Worth pointing that out. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the cloaking carapace because I did see that earlier and I forgot about it.
Yeah, the big thing about cloaking carapace is that even without getting hit, you get 2 armor and 10% harder to hit. So that's pretty good value from the start. I mean, not great value for T3 pricing, but that's okay. But then you also you could get an additional 30% evasion on top of that, which 40% evasion for one mod is pretty nuts.
Mm-hmm. So it says that it becomes harder to hit, and then I guess that's until the end of the combat, isn't it?
No, it's until the end of the turn.
Oh, okay.
It's 10% harder to hit for that turn. The 10% harder to hit up top is for the combat. That's like a baseline effect of the mod is 10% harder to hit and plus 2 armor. And then you also get an additional 10% harder to hit every time someone hits you, which is really funny because I bet most of those hits are going to be grazes that don't actually do all that much damage.
Man, yeah. I mean, I gotta get better at reading. It's tough. This little text. So yeah, that's Kiriko.
Moving on to Shakarn. Raiders can benefit from evasion quite a bit. They get hollow displacement shields. Let's call it mid-game-ish mod. Basically it's a mod that you can get early, but you have to make some sacrifices to get it early.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good mod, especially on Raiders. Raiders really like having hollow displacement shields. I think some of the most fun I've ever had playing Shakarn is with hollow displacement mods or hollow displacement shields on Raiders. They just benefit a whole lot because of how much Shakarn in general revolves around getting that really strong Alpha Strike turn. Hollow displacement shields, again, we talked earlier, Skitter is primarily a tool for giving you a better Alpha Strike, getting you better setup, getting you into a better position for that Alpha Strike turn. Shakarn benefits a lot from that. Shakarn units tend to have like really bursty sort of damage, so being able to get into a really good position that lets you lay down a lot of damage in a single turn is really, really nice. Yeah, you can see Omni Rush does 14 damage base. Their Omni Carbine is a 12 damage repeating attack on a T1 unit is absolutely insane. We talked earlier about how crazy it was that Bouncers get that. Raiders get that. Now, of course, realistically, they're dealing less damage than that, but it's still on a T1 unit. Like, Bouncers are at least a T2. Raiders just do so much damage if you get them up close to your enemy units. And, hey, once again, positioning tool. Get them up close with Skitter from Hollow Displacement Shields.
Mm-hmm.
But
it makes sense because these guys can get status effects on them. It's a little bit easier to kill. I mean, 2 armor is pretty good, right?
2 armor's okay. They have, I mean, like, compare them with Frenzied. They have close to T1 melee defensive stats, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, Frenzied have plus 5 HP on them. So, I mean, Raiders out of the box are decently tanky. Not quite melee unit tanky. That 5 HP matters a lot more on T1 units than on T2 units. So, like earlier, I was saying with a bouncer, it's not a big deal to be missing that plus 5 HP. On a T2 unit, that's true. That's a lower percentage of kind of their effective HP is going to be made up by that plus 5. It's a slightly bigger deal between T1 units, but that's still, these units are very, very close.
Agreed. I don't have anything else in my notes for Shakarn.
I think the only other particularly notable thing about Shakarn is what I already brought up earlier with the, they have a hero that gets evasive maneuvers, which is really fucking funny on the race that also has a mod that grants skitter.
Why not? Just everybody can skitter together. It'd be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take another quick look through. I don't think there's anything else particularly notable about Shakarn in this regard. Syndicate.
They have that mod that you said with the Kirko is nice. Is it Mantra Clarity?
Yeah, they have less ability to apply it though, unless you get all the way up to Control Amplifier, and even then it's only against indentured units, so you kind of have to be specifically building around it, and even then I wouldn't really call it a like. I wouldn't say that Syndicate is a good target for an evasion build, but they're pretty okay at countering evasion, between Mantra of Clarity giving that 20% easier to hit. They have early on, of course, the classic combo exploitive targeting system plus Psytech vision enhancers is plus 30% accuracy. That'll help you a lot against a lot of evasion builds. Kind of lighter evasion, like that's more accuracy than Guardian Daemon Shell is going to provide, and a lot of the time, Guardian Daemon Shell. I mean, I kind of brought Guardian Daemon Shell. I've mentioned a lot in this video just because it is the best source of evasion in a mod that you can generally get access to.
Yeah.
So if you're able to get an accuracy higher than that on every single one of your units before the battle starts without having to use like additional units to do so, that's pretty nice. That'll help you out against most evasion builds, especially if you're also putting Mantra of Clarity on that too. Mantra of Clarity, actually, it's 20% easier to hit that it provides, isn't attached to any kind of inflict. So you only need like your Overseer to graze to get that effect on a unit.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I did just see that the Mirages have the ability to obscure the people underneath them, which is kind of useful.
That's true. Mirages I do not like quite enough to really recommend them. I would consider them worse than Lightning Riders.
Ooh,
but they are actually surprisingly good though. I have fought against them a few times. They're honestly less the defense mode and more the fact that they have a psi attack. You can do some really crazy stuff with them, like put Aether Storm on them. Ends up being really nasty on them actually. But yeah, the defense mode, if you combine Mantra of Clarity with their defense mode, then yeah, you could get some pretty good evasion out of that.
Oh yeah, I could totally see that. If you teleport forward, enter defensive mode, then he's got the upgraded defensive mode. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's definitely better on Enforcers than on Mirages, but like for example, if you early on run into an Autonom NPC and befriend them and get 3 network links, then Mirages are going to be a lot better than Enforcers for the Aether Storm strat. So,
yeah, I could see that. It'd be great. Maybe I should do that in our MP. I'm playing Syndicate. There's Autonom.
You're playing Syndicate. There's Autonom. You can always just hard tech towards the final side mod. That's always an option for you.
Hey, if Mr. No wants to be my ally, just saying, I could be a great ally.
All right, so kind of moving on from Syndicate. Again, summarizing Syndicate, you can kind of, if you really want to mess with their tools, get an evasion thing going between Mantra of Clarity and Mirage and Guardian. But in this discussion, I would consider them most notable for how well they sort of counter evasion. I think they have the most tools to do so. On top of having, plus accuracy, really good plus accuracy mods on their ranged units. They also get the Enforcer, which is a really, really good melee unit. And if someone's trying to run evasion against you, unless they're putting that evasion on their flying units, Enforcers are just going to tear right through them. Enforcers are an incredibly good unit, by the way, guys.
Yeah. They're just amazing. Melee, psychic, bypass everything.
Yeah, so kind of moving past that, going on to Vanguard. Vanguard, I think, would be the classic race for doing evasion defense, just because in addition to being able to throw Guardian Daemon or Phase Walk onto them from your secret tech, you also get a mod, early mod too, that gives evasion in improved combat sensors. Their detection mod gives 15% evasion as well. You can throw on top of that, of course, gunships get evasive maneuvers too. So you can get quite a bit of evasion on their units just from mods without having to use abilities to do it, which I always find really valuable. Just because it's both less of a headache to do, and also because it means that you have units that are just contributing to the fighting instead of like throwing buffs around. So it's a lot more pleasant to do it this way, right? There's a lot less like micromanagement. And though, of course, Shrouded Step giving 65% evasion is going to generally be more powerful. You also then have to deal with like managing cooldowns and making sure all the spacing of your units is such that they're all in the cloud and they all get the benefit. And then you have to make sure enemy units don't get into your cloud. Whereas with Vanguard, you slap on Guardian Daemon Shell, you slap on combat sensors, you call it a day. You're good to go. It's effective. It works really well. It's not going to be used against you. And you get to just think about shooting people rather than worrying about that too much. It's particularly powerful in gunships because, again, they're a flying unit. And, again, they already get boosts from evasive maneuvers, which is less valuable on gunships than it is on Lightning Riders. Lightning Riders get up really close and personal with their big AoE attack, so they really need that evasion. And that's kind of their 1 AP attack, is this really big hit. Gunships get the Buster Missile as their 1 AP attack, which isn't nearly as good. But, I mean, it's still a neat trick. They still get to fly in really close for 1 turn, get that additional 25% evasion, plus 10% evasion from flying, plus, if you put combat sensors on them, that's an additional 15%. So even without talking about Guardian Daemon, that's like 50% evasion just for running up and using your Buster Missile. Most units aren't going to be able to retaliate against that very effectively, even if you're right up in their grill. And then that means on the following turn, you get to just gun them down with your basic attack at point blank range. They didn't stop you from being able to do that, and that's typically where you get some really good damage in. Then, of course, you can throw Guardian Daemon Shell on top of that. So you have 15% plus 20% is 35%, plus gunships get an additional 10% from being flying is 45% evasion before we start factoring in evasive defense, or evasive maneuvers, which at the very least you move 1 hex. So that puts you at 50% evasion, right? Just from 2 mods and still getting to use your triple attack.
Yeah.
So
sounds right.
Yeah, that's pretty sick. Vanguard also has like some nice tools for bypass for like fighting evasion defense modes or evasive builds also. Not all that many, but like if you are running up against an opponent that is running evasion heavy, there's some nice tricks that they've got. Of course, rail accelerators gives them 10% additional accuracy. They get a lot of their units. I know their troopers do. I don't know if any of their other units get steady aim, where they get 15% more accuracy if they're in cover. But that's pretty nice on their troopers. The big thing is their engineers get targeting calibration, which is actually a really powerful buff. +1 range, of course, which is really nice. In addition to just getting the extra range, that also gives you +1 effective range. I don't know if we've talked about this before. That's like a hidden stat that every attack gets that determines the long range penalties. range bonuses from calibration or from like rail accelerators. It also increases your it's actually called optimum range. It increases your optimum range as well as your actual range. So you deal with long range penalties less, and then that targeting calibration also gives them an additional 30% accuracy on top of that. So you do have some nice tools for punching through evasion if you want them. You also get stuff like backpacks let you get up closer. They also have a number of AoE effects. Of course, troopers get grenades. Gunships get the Buster missile. If you tech enough for it, you can get the rocket launcher turrets that are broken.
They don't come with melee, so jetpacking a melee unit forward is a little trickier to do unless you give a hero a melee weapon, or you get some NPC units that can do some melee, like the Psychos.
Oh, all of this, and I completely forgot about Incinerator module. Their other big thing is Incinerator module. You put that on like a bike or something. Immolate, Incinerator mod actually gives immolation, which is a pretty high tier status effect, actually.
Yeah.
10% damage per turn, or 10 damage per turn, and 30% easier to hit. So you could just have a bike like run up, do the big AoE, which actually the bike AoE does not bypass evasion, I don't believe.
Yeah.
But if you do manage to hit something with Incinerator module and get them immolated, like, you won't have to worry about if they have evasion on them anymore. Between that, between rail accelerators, between targeting calibration, between the stupid trooper thing that I can never remember. There's a number of plus accuracy boosts that Vanguard gets access to beat down, or to help them fight against evasive builds. It kind of makes up for the fact that they don't have basically any form of melee, unless you deploy Valkyrie, which, by the way, is one of the best ops in the game.
Yeah, deploy Valkyrie is amazing.
Yeah, and they also get more AoE than a lot of races would typically get access to, but it's all kind of like, this is all sort of like, none of this is really a direct counter, because like targeting calibration requires that you bring along engineers. The steady aim requires that you're using their T1 unit. Incinerator module requires that you hit them with a laser attack first. Rail accelerators is nice, but on its own doesn't really help you enough against evasion. But like, if you're really hurting for something, there's a lot of different avenues that you can look at with Vanguard to try to counter evasion.
You know, that's good, because I didn't really put that in my general tips, and I think that is worth pointing out.
Yeah, and then of course you they're really good as a chassis for evasion, just because they get that improved combat sensors, and then also kind of things like jetpacks and nanite injectors are mods that don't give additional evasion, but they tend to play pretty well into what evasion tends to be doing, which is usually an evasive build will also be kind of a burstier build, again going into that like Alpha Strike kind of thing. And jetpacks and nanite injectors are both really powerful tools for that exact same situation.
Yeah.
So while I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, you're going evasive, you're doing an evasion build, you know, make sure to slap on jetpacks on there, but like, whatever you're doing with that evasion build, you're probably also, like, nanites or jetpacks is probably going to help that out anyways, just in general, just because the nature of evasion builds is that whatever you tend to be doing already tends to also fit into what those mods are also doing.
Agreed. So I think we could talk a little bit about mods, but there really isn't much to say on the matter, right? We've already talked quite a bit about the mod options that you have available in the secret tech lines and the racial tech lines. But yeah, do you have any thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, there's just one thing I want to mention that I probably should have brought up earlier and I didn't. Just kind of another avenue in which Vanguard gets to kind of soft get around evasion is if you tech up to it, they get fire bursts. Assembly gets access to fire bursts too. This is in the firearms tree. Fire burst is a really powerful mod, and you can use that to shoot the ground next to enemy units and still do a lot of damage to them, which is really punishing for evasive builds, because so it's only 75% of the damage gets attached to that AoE, right? And it can't carry status effects with it either. But if your opponent has been pouring a lot into pumping up their evasion, they probably don't have like great defensive stats aside from that. So if you're able to bypass that with like Fireburst does, dealing 25% less damage, you're still going to end up coming out way ahead. Especially since like this mod on its own gives 30% increased damage just by the nature of being a T3 offense mod.
Yeah.
And that's really more notable for Vanguard than for Assembly. Just because Vanguard has between troopers and gunships and engineers and eventually, ideally, walkers that are all able to take advantage of this. With Assembly, like you're not going to be putting Fireburst on scavengers. You're not going to be putting it on. Well, I think the next unit that can really take it is, so you've got Vorpals. It's worth putting on Vorpals. The Vorpals don't really have the damage to carry with it like they used to. So I would say that if you already have Fireburst for other reasons, put it on your Vorpals, but don't base your build around I'm going to get Fireburst and put it on my Vorpals. That's just kind of like if you've already got it deal.
Mm-hmm.
But then after Vorpals, like your next option for putting Fireburst on stuff is the Disassembler, their penultimate unit.
Yeah, pretty nice.
So it's really much more notable for Vanguard because they have a lot more units that are able to use Fireburst than Assembly does. Before someone in a comment or something brings it up, I did mention putting Fireburst on Engineers. Engineers with a shotgun, of course, are just as bad for Fireburst as Assembly Scavengers are, but the Engineer turret, if you don't mod it up to be a rocket turret, it will inherit firearm mods, so you could put Fireburst onto their turret, which probably makes their turret pretty good.
Yeah, I haven't played with that at all, so I wouldn't know. So yeah, I just wanted to point out really quickly that the Huntress that I modded out in the example combat has 2 Amazon mods that increase evasion and one assembly one that increases evasion. If you're trying to go like super evasion on one unit, you can't get all of them from one of the racial things or one of the secret tech things. You have to kind of dip your toes in a couple places to get a lot of evasion on one unit. I don't think that's terribly effective because, like you said, if you invest heavily in evasion, you probably got less defense and less offense in general. So yeah, that's the last thing I wanted to say here. Anything else you want to say?
I think that's pretty much all I have to say about evasive builds. Something that maybe someone who's watching through this might have found notable is that for most of these races, I kind of said like, yeah, this race doesn't really have anything to do with evasion or isn't particularly notable in that regard. And then, or I might have said like, this race has a couple tools that are notable for this, but it's not really a race that I would recommend doing an evasion build with. That's pretty common. I think that unless you're doing a flyer build, an evasive build isn't really something that you plan out so much as maybe just like you tend to get some sources of evasion, so you throw them on, and then if you happen to be able to stumble into getting multiple sources of evasion, well, they do work pretty nice when combined together. But an evasive build isn't usually something that I'd recommend building towards so much as maybe something that you just kind of put together if you happen to already have all the tools for it.
Cool. Awesome. I'm sure there's a couple things we missed about evasion. I'm really happy with this discussion. Thanks for joining me, Ninjew. We'll see you around.
Yep. Nice to be on here.